It's a real honor and a thrill for me to be with you this afternoon, and I want to just take a moment and thank the School Improvement Network for inviting me and for giving me this great opportunity. They are one of our business partners at CCSSO, and I can't say enough great things about the relationship that we have with them as a business partner and the things that we have been able to accomplish by having that relationship and that trust. And I want to talk to you about some of those things this afternoon. So InTASC, many of you may have heard of that acronym, and some of you may have never heard of it. But the main thing for you to remember is that it was a group of states who got together and said, why reinvent the wheel over and over and over again, state by state, and why don't we collaborate and work together and come up with model core teaching standards that will help teachers do better in the classroom. And so they did. And starting in 1992, they created model core teaching standards that we have now revised in 2011. And I'll get more into detail about something brand new that we also pulled some of those same teachers and teacher educators and others back together to help us with, which were learning progressions for teachers. And it's a way for teachers to think about their practice, either as an individual when they go home and at night and they're thinking about the lessons that they taught, and maybe something didn't go just right, and maybe they want to know how they can just get a little bit better the next time that they teach the lesson. And so the progressions have 3 different levels that you can look at and figure out where you are in your current practice and where you want to be and what are some steps that you can take to get there. So I'm real excited about those. It's the first time we've had anything like that in this country. And so we're really pleased to be able to offer that to anyone who wants to use them. And then finally, our third product that we'll talk in more detail about is the Lumi book. And that has been out just a little over 3 weeks. And it's something that we've been working on for about a little over 2 years. And the Lumi book, the best way for me to describe it, is that it uses the School Improvement Network's platform. And then it's like an e-book on steroids. So if you think about the social media aspects, if you think about ways that you can have cohorts of people that are reading the book at the same time, and they can write each other, teachers that you've never met before, any part of the country. If you are reading along and you're thinking about what does a best practice look like, or you see it described in writing, but you wonder, what does that look like in my classroom? You can click on a video and it'll show you an example, or you can read other articles about it. So there are lots of ways that you can use this book. Now, I can advise you not to start on page 1 and read all the way through the end. It takes a long time to do that, and it's pretty dense in the materials, so you may want to take just chunks of it and read it. But I'd highly recommend it to you, and one of the great things about it is that it is absolutely free to anyone in the entire world that wants to use it. And that's because of the School Improvement Network. So let me tell you a couple stories before I get into more detail about this. On the weekends, I would go home because there wasn't a lot to do in this little town on the weekends for a 20-year-old who had just graduated from college. So, and every Sunday evening when I got ready to drive back, my mom would walk me to my car, and she would help me put my luggage in the car. And she would always say, Janice, don't forget, you're doing the most important job there is. You can make or break a child's life. What you're doing is so important. And the students that you teach will remember what you do in the classroom for the rest of their lives. And then she would go on to tell me about one of the situations that she remembered about one of her teachers. And what she didn't know is that on the drive back, I would ponder what she told me. And I would think about, well, what does that mean for my classroom? And what should I do in situations like that? And how would I handle it if I had been in that situation? Well, those chats that my mom and I had out by my car are really priceless to me. One, because every beginning teacher needs support, no matter how they get it. And I didn't really have a support system because I finished college in December and got a job mid-year. And so anything that had been done to support new teachers was long over by the time I arrived on the scene. And I didn't really have any family members that were educators. And so I didn't know a lot about what it meant to be a teacher. So those stories that my mom shared with me were really important. And now they're even more important because it helps me to think about my mother as a young person. And just recently, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so she doesn't have those memories anymore. And I'm so thankful that she was able to share them with me when she did, and that I can remember them and think about how they apply to the work that I do on a daily basis. So after I finished teaching in that little middle school, social studies, South Carolina history, ask me anything about South Carolina. And the other great thing about it is my daughter actually followed in my footsteps a few years later, and guess what she taught? South Carolina history. So, but after I had taught there for a while, my college sweetheart came along, swept me off my feet, whisked me away to another state after we got married, and I started teaching special education in a high school. Because over the course of teaching in that middle school, I found out that I was really intrigued by students with disabilities. And I was really intrigued about how students learn, because I didn't know much about how students learned or how they didn't learn, and why sometimes they got it and sometimes they didn't get it, and why was it that, sometimes they could recall what I had taught and other times they couldn't. So I decided to switch gears and become a high school special ed teacher. So the first day of class, Jotham, you'll be glad to know this, in this new school, I was standing at my door, greeting my students, just like I had every day as when I was a middle school teacher. And the students came in one by one. And finally, somewhere, a couple minutes into it, I looked over my shoulder just to make sure that students had taken their seats and they were looking at the board and what I had written on it. And there were no students in the classroom. And I had a moment of panic. And you can imagine what was racing through my mind. And so I actually walked into the classroom and I looked to see what was happening. And there along the wall, near where the door was, every one of the students was plastered up against the wall. You know why? They didn't want to be seen in the special classroom. They didn't want anybody to know that as a high school student that they had a disability. They didn't want anybody to see them sitting in my classroom. So what did that tell me on day one as a teacher new to that school about my students? The first thing it told me was that I wasn't going to teach much reading or mathematics or science or social studies or whatever the students came in with for a long time. Because first of all, I had to make sure that these students were comfortable with who they were and why they were in that classroom and what we could do to build on the confidence or the self-confidence that they were lacking. So for the first week, every day, the same thing happened. And I would just, agonize over what can I do to help these students to feel good about themselves. Well, very few of them knew their multiplication tables. Very few of them could read. And they had had teacher after teacher after teacher who had tried really, really hard to teach them how to read. And so in talking with them, I found out that what most of them were interested in was learning to drive. That's all they really had on their mind was learning to drive, because they were all 15, 16 years old. And so one afternoon, I was leaving school, and I drove by the transportation department. And I thought, I'm going to go and get some driver's manuals. So I pulled my car in, stopped, went in, and I asked for 45 driver's manuals. Now, I had just moved to this new state, and I had to take the test, for my driver's license, but 45, they looked at me like, why, lady, do you need 45? So I took them back to the classroom, and we started using the driving manual to learn. I used it. They thought I was using it to teach them how to learn to drive. But what I was really doing was using it to teach them how to read. And at the end of the time that we studied the driver's manual, I actually got my principal to agree to let me take them to the driver's department where they got their license. And they took the test, and all but a handful of them passed the test the first time. And the ones that didn't, guess who taught them? The other students. And so they came back and they learned from the other students, and they learned about how to make sure that they were going to pass the driver's test the next time around. So they went back and they took the driver's test. So a few years after that, I got a phone call one day, and by that time I had moved back to South Carolina, and I was in a different job, and I was really missing my students because I wasn't teaching at the time. I heard this voice on the other end of the phone, and he said, "Miss Poda, I bet you don't remember me." He said, "This is Robert, and I'm in your town." He said, "I've become a truck driver." He said, "Because you taught me how to drive, and now I'm a truck driver, and I wanted to see if I could take you to lunch." So then another situation that I had was about 4 years ago. I was at home one night, had a long day, and I didn't like to answer the phone much because I had a job where I had to talk on the phone a lot, and usually not to people that were real happy. So I was known and still known by some of my friends to screen my phone calls. But so I picked up the phone, I looked at it. I didn't recognize the number and I didn't recognize the name, but something possessed me to answer the phone. So I answered it. The voice on the other end of the phone said, "Miss Poda, I don't know if you remember me or not, but you taught me 32 years ago. And I found you on the internet. And I wanted to say thank you." She said, "You saved my life." She said, "I don't know if you know that or not, but she said, when I was your student, I was on drugs. I was involved in a lot of things that I shouldn't have been involved in. I was really seriously thinking about dropping out of school. And she said, you were the one who took an interest in me and made me realize that I needed to stay in school and learn as much as I could, even with the disability that I had." And she said, "So I just wanted you to know that because of you, I now have 3 children of my own, and I'm the person at the high school that's keeping other kids from dropping out." So those are the kinds of stories I share with you because I waited 32 years for that phone call. I didn't know I was going to get it. There are lots of other students I haven't heard from, but those jewels and those that you know that you have made a connection with because you took the time to get to know who they were and what they needed and helping to prepare them for their future is really what is important then, and it's even more important today. And so what I hope that we can do through CCSSO is to use tools like the InTASC standards and the progressions and the Lumi book to integrate the Common Core and the teaching practices that we're expecting in classrooms today to make sure that those are the kinds of classroom environments that every child is receiving, no matter where they live, no matter what background they come from, and no matter whether they're disabled or not disabled. So I think it's really important for us to think about how we do that. So the Common Core standards, in my way of thinking, is the what we want students to know and be able to do. And the InTASC standards are the how we get there, how we use those standards as a guide to be able to say, am I using the right practices in my classroom? Are there things that I can be doing differently? And what are they? And how do I reflect on that? And how do I get feedback? And how do I keep improving? Because really what teaching is about is continuous improvement. None of us are done. It's not one and done. Don't pull out the lesson plans from 30 years ago that are so yellowed that you can hardly read them. Because, someone told me one time that there are teachers that have 20 years in the classroom and 1 year of experience. And so we don't want those kinds of experiences for students. And the good news is there are very, 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 very few teachers that feel that way, that don't come in wanting to do their very best. As a matter of fact, the teachers that I have been privileged to know are so excited about the interactions that they have with their students and what they're able to accomplish and what their students walk away learning, that they are striving and begging and scrounging around for information to share with their students. As a matter of fact, I have one teacher who used to go dumpster diving, who's a good friend of mine, and what she would do is she would literally climb in the dumpsters on Sunday mornings to get things out of the clippings of the newspaper, the coupons, so she could go and get soap and toothpaste and all the other things that students needed so that she could help make their lives better. Those are the kinds of teachers that I've been privileged to know throughout my career. And so the InTASC standards are a way for us to think about teaching as a developmental continuum. It's a way for us to focus on what those 21st knowledge and skills are, even though someone said to me the other day, should we really think about them as 21st century skills since we're already 13 years into the 21st century? It's really about today and tomorrow and what are those skills that students are going to need to know and be able to do to be successful in careers or in college or wherever it is that they find themselves in the future. And how we personalize learning and for diverse learners. And I think that personalization of learning is so important. And as you heard Alan November talk about this morning, how the lack of personalization and how so often we treat all students the same and how unfortunate that is because all students are different. It doesn't matter who they are. They all bring unique characteristics to the classroom that we need to figure out what makes them tick and what motivates them and what makes them hungry for learning. It's not the memorization that's going to make a difference when a child leaves a classroom. It's whether or not they know how to learn. And so learning to learn is such an important aspect of what these standards are trying to do. We also know that there are new roles for teachers as leaders, and that there more and more we need to have those kinds of roles because principals are being expected to do impossible jobs these days with all the observations that they're supposed to do, the coaching they're supposed to give to teachers, the implementation of Common Core, the mad mamas, the buses, and the books. I mean, you name it, and those are all the responsibilities that they have. So I think that we've got to find a way to ensure that teachers also have opportunities to be leaders. The standards are grouped in 4 different categories, so it's a way for us to think about them and to make sure that we are covering all of them and we understand the importance of all of those. Content certainly is an important part of what we do as teachers, but those relationships are also an important part. There's also some cross-cutting themes that we've included, and if you come to the session later this afternoon, I'll go into more detail about that and how we've integrated the Common Core and the InTASC standards together. And the progressions, as I mentioned earlier, how they're broken down into 3 developmental continuum levels, and so that you can use them as an individual, you can get a group of teachers together, a principal can use them to give feedback to teachers, and also someone who's preparing to be a teacher It's a great way for them to learn and to get feedback as they're thinking about going into the teaching profession. The Lumi book, we're going to spend a good bit of time in the afternoon breakout session on this, but this innovative, highly interactive resource is just out there waiting for you to come up with new ways of using it. What's so great about it is it can be added to at any time. If you have resources that you think are valuable, that other teachers would benefit, you can add them to the book yourself. So there are all kinds of ways that this can be a learning tool for teachers. So I hope that you will join me this afternoon in the breakout session, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.